It's just the voices in your head about everything that's going to go wrong. You're catastrophizing, as opposed to flowing. Carrying those kind of feelings without confronting them is going to eat away at your central nervous system, right? It's what it does.
Welcome to The Defense Never Rests with Morgan and Akins, your monthly dose of uncommon sense about all things legal and some that are not.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of The Defense Never Rests. I am your host, Trisha Baxter, and joining me again, Talar Herculean Corsi. I don't know why I have a hard time with your middle name. I know I'm not saying it right. Am I saying it right?
You can't say it wrong. I don't think anyone in my family pronounces it the same way. I'm not even kidding. My brother says Herculean. I say Herculean. I don't know what my mother says, but don't worry about it. You can't butcher it. You're fine.
Well, I love having you. You're like I said during our episode today, you're my spirit sister.
I didn't know that, Trish.
Yeah, you're my
That's
spirit
so
sister.
special. I'm privileged and honored. Thank you.
We have the same, I think the same mindsets, or we approach our personal growth journeys the same way. And I love hearing what you have to read. I'm just going to steal your book list from because everything you've sent my way has been so good.
Well, you know what? You still haven't responded to my one comment on LinkedIn from about 37 days ago, because I do keep track of those if you don't respond to me, and it'll keep me up at night. No, but we had an episode, I forget who it was with. I think it was with Olivia, and you were telling me what you were reading and I couldn't remember, but I wanted to get it. What were you reading?
Metahuman by Deepak Chopra.
Yes, that's what it is. Okay, I wanted to pick that up too.
That's it's kind of in line a little bit with
Eckhart.
Yeah, a little bit. They overlap pretty significantly. Metahuman is really about a consciousness, that is really forming the physical world. I don't want to get too far out because it's out there a little bit, but I find it fascinating. I highly recommend it. But
okay,
yes, you are my spiritual sister, because we have the same books. We read the same things. We think the same in many respects. So I have a mad respect for you when I see that you're reading something. I'm going to pick it up. So.
Oh, that's very kind. And thank you that you're so gracious in continuing to invite me on your podcast, so I don't have to go through the work and expense and labor. I could just tag along.
Of course.
So I appreciate that.
And before we get into the guests, I just want you to give you a little plug for your book. I can't remember if we did it last time, but I'm going to do it this time. Tell everybody what's going on with that little thing behind you. If you're listening from an audio perspective, Talar has a screenshot behind her of her new book out.
Yes, I have a new children's book out. It's called Ralphie's Rules for Living the Good Life, and I wrote it to raise money for orphanages in Lebanon. It is currently available on bit.ly/Ralphie's Rules. It is case specific, so the R in Ralphie and Rules is capital, bit.ly/Ralphie's Rules, or you can just find me on LinkedIn, and you will see lots of information about Ralphie and his rules. And I don't know if I told you, Trish, have you read Don Miguel Ruiz's The Four Agreements?
I have. Awesome book.
Okay. So Ralphie's Rules is the Four Agreements for Kids. And
yeah?
I even contacted the publisher to see if I could get copyright permission to call it The Four Agreements for Kids, but I couldn't get copyright permission, so it became Ralphie's Rules. That's what happened.
I love it. That's awesome.
So thank you for letting me plug that.
Well, yes, definitely pick it up. I saw a preview of it. I haven't gotten the actual book, so I'm waiting for it to come on Amazon, which comes out in March. But the preview I saw was so cute. I loved it. So definitely pick it up.
Thank you.
Haven't yet. So on today's episode, we are joined by Bob Levant, and what an amazing man he is. He has almost 3 decades of experience being a trial lawyer in the meat of criminal defense and high-end plaintiffs work. I mean, he's tried so many cases, and the past couple of years, his work has really shifted to recognizing the culture of the legal profession, which has a lot to do with anxiety and suffering and stress. And he talks about And he experienced all of that. He didn't talk about it in the early days. He didn't really let himself feel in the early days, but now he's where he's at. He can look back and he's in a position to really openly talk about the anxiety that he faced, the suffering. He talks about consciousness and yoga and meditating. And for a trial attorney, a male trial attorney, to talk about things so openly and vulnerably is really rare and so needed. So I've seen something he had written, which blew me away. And I reached out to him and I said, would you mind coming on the podcast? And he was absolutely ready. He was like, yes, definitely count me in. He has a podcast called The Iron Advocate, which is really around those themes. And he talks to lawyers in a vulnerable way. And I'm such a huge fan of his. So without further ado, let's bring him in. Well, hey, Bob, welcome to the podcast. Are you coming from Philly today? Are you filming in Philly?
I'm not filming in Philly. I'm up in kind of cold Northeast Pennsylvania, a little east of the home of The Office, a little east of Scranton. So
Nice.
that's where I am. And hopefully I'll be strapped into a snowboard, maybe in another, I don't know, 6-7 hours or so.
Oh,
See how
so
the
you're
day-
just waiting for this
see how
podcast
the
to be
day-
over, right?
It's all downhill from here. So get done this and see where we are.
Well, let me say, I've come across you on your social media content, and I was blown away, as I kind of said when we were started filming, is to have a experienced trial lawyer talking openly about the things that you talk about. It's, I think, insane that I even called you a unicorn. You have been in practicing law in the upper echelons of law, I would say, for over 3 decades, trial attorney, the epitome of what you would think of that would be, especially for men, would be this ego-driven, self-centered guy that is all about profit. But what you see when you tune into what you put out, the kind of content that you put out, you talk about anxiety, consciousness, fear, suffering, meditating, and yoga. I mean, like, what male trial attorney is doing this? What are you doing to us?
It's if I'm a unicorn, right? The headstand is really hard when you're a unicorn, though. The horn gets in the way, but off the grid, I'll talk to Talar and get some tips about that. I'm just speaking the obvious. That's all I do. Almost 3 decades. You're making me a little more ancient than I actually am, but it actually feels like 74 decades or so. So it's trying cases is dog years. In a lot of ways, but all I'm really doing, quite frankly, is giving some voice to what I think the vast majority of lawyers are feeling out there, particularly if they're litigating in any way, in the courtroom in any way, or not, filing briefs, putting themselves out in any kind of an adverse scenario. So that's what I think I'm doing. Now, maybe I'm the only one out here, and I'm just talking about this anxiety and everybody else has got it figured out. But, I guess that's for the reader or the viewer or the listener to figure out. And that's not really my thing.
Well, Bob, I think you are a very special person and you are unique, but not in that way. I don't think you're alone when it comes to anxiety and vulnerability and those things you're talking about. And I think it is fantastic that you are using your voice to share that, especially when it comes to men. And what I'm curious about is there something that happened in your life where you felt called and propelled into using your voice to talk about these issues?
I don't think there's any one event. I mean, it's really been a journey for me. The first significant chunk of my career trying cases, I muscled my way through it. I have some raw talent. There are some things that I do well that lend themselves to the courtroom, and I'll work my ass off. And so, my motto was, I'll just outwork everybody. And even back then I probably wasn't even willing to really recognize I had the raw talent, but I had it. And I got good results. And so that seemingly was enough, right? That was working for me by objective standards, or standards in the law, it was working for me and for my career. But it's a really really heavy way to practice and try cases. Because you are carrying all of the fears and insecurities that, quite frankly, drive you to respond that way, right? That's why you're muscling your way through it, or for me, why I was muscling my way through it. So it's a longer journey, Tolar, which is, how can I, number one, try to find some more fulfillment in the law and some more, relief, even if it's with the recognition that there are certain, just undeniable truths about, what comes with the being a lawyer. And then, quite frankly, once that started, I became a better and better lawyer as I went forward, right? And I became more and more creative and more loose, and, was litigating from the heart and not from the head. And so what I thought was me being really effective was me actually being held back. And so from there, there's a series of things that happen, things that happen in a case that you can tangibly connect to that you wouldn't have done otherwise. And then it flows out into your personal life and, how you manage, stressful situations. And certainly I've been through some wars, in the courtroom and out, and you grow from those. And so it's a kind of global thing. I cannot pinpoint one specific place. I can pinpoint when I sort of knew that my journey was going to shift, but it wasn't because of that one moment. That was just kind of a recognition.
Well, let's back up and talk about your journey specifically. Can you walk through what you did in the early years and then eventually this journey that you got on? Can you talk a little bit more about where you came from a career standpoint?
Sure. Some of it starts in down law school. So I went to what is now UDC Law. Was then a freestanding law school in DC that originally was founded by Antioch, which is a liberal arts school out in Ohio, and then was the District of Columbia School of Law. It was a clinical, very advanced, sort of thinking, progressive, diverse school that had me in the courtroom early on as a law student, which is where I wanted to be. And then I went to the public defender's office in Philadelphia, which is a significant part of the story, right? Because it's an enormously stressful job. You get there right out of law school. You have no idea what you are doing. Literally no idea. You're walking over to the courtroom with 70 case files under your arm. You are completely and utterly sick to your stomach. Everybody in the courtroom is there to tell you how dumb you are and what a horrible job you're doing. That's from the court staff to the judges, to the clients, to the cops, all of them. And so you're like on public display, either seemingly or really just being, kind of mocked on a daily basis. It is a really hard way to practice. At the moment, you don't even understand all that. It's just like white water on top of you, and you're just trying to get through the day of hearings, and so at the time I didn't understand anything except that I was just in constant and utter pain, unless it was like an off day or, whatever. And then that advanced, I got to a point where I was trying serious cases in there. But the early days at the public defender office, Jeff, my buddy and partner on the podcast, we laugh about it all the time. It was just, complete and total chaos, just a total shit show. So that's where it started. And then, we
the
can
shit
kind
show
of
started.
Forward. Oh, sure. Exactly. That's where the shit show started.
But you didn't know it.
Can I say shit show on here?
Yeah. I'm dying for someone to really cuss, like own it and cuss, right?
Okay.
Nobody does.
Keep asking questions. Go ahead.
You may be my first explicit, my E sign on Apple. I don't have one.
Great. That's right.
But so when you're going through it, do you think you're the only person that feels that pain? Obviously you mentioned you don't recognize it at the time, but what's your thought process like when you're in it? Can you go back in time?
You can generate that sort of feeling. There is a camaraderie about it, amongst the other young public defenders, but you're not really talking about it in that way. Right. And this is where that sort of culture of the practice starts. It is a practice and a culture where folks are not encouraged to admit fear, even in, kind of different jobs, like being a public defender, where if they're going to be kind of outside the box people, you're probably going to find them in an office like that. But still, you know, the culture of the law, and it starts in law school, is, you know, we have all the answers. We don't admit fear, you know, and we, you know, and we show strength. And so we all felt it, but we didn't articulate it in a way that in hindsight would have been, you know, much more helpful than the way that we handled it. I mean, Jeff had a jar of aspirin. It was like this big on his desk. Like, it was like, I don't know, it was like some ridiculous number. It was like 500. It was gone, you know, before the first year was out. I mean, it was like he was taking them like Pez, you know, and the aspirin wasn't what was really gonna fix it. But so anyway, yeah, that's the way I can respond to that.
So where did you go after the PD's office?
I hung out a shingle. I went into private practice after about 4 years as a public defender. And they are like dog years. You know, I was, you know, only out of law school a little over a year and a half. And, you know, I had juries in the box and was trying serious cases. I ultimately got assigned to a courtroom at the public defender's office where the judge was, for a variety of reasons, driven by these statistics of how many cases he was getting done in a week or a month or a year. And he would be picking a jury. He would be on trial, and he would have a jury deliberating in the jury room all at the same time. And so I got assigned to that courtroom for about a year and a half, and just tried cases like every day, all day. So I felt like I had been there a lot more than 4 years. So I hung out a shingle, and I, you know, went into private practice, and just started hustling.
And was this a criminal defense private practice?
Yeah, when I left the PD's office, that was all I knew how to do. I barely knew how to do that. You know, that was all I knew how to do. So I hung out a shingle and started hustling criminal cases. That's right.
And then you went to that's where you stayed for about 20 years.
Yeah. So I did that, and it, you know, the practice grew, and fortunately I was successful. And I guess about, you know, after a few years, I started, you know, really trying to figure out how to expand my skills, you know, and be able to do civil cases, which ultimately ended up with a heavy dose of complex civil rights cases. So a lot of my career, particularly the last, you know, like 10 or so years in the courtroom, was trying a heavy dose of plaintiff civil rights cases. So wrongful incarceration cases and, you know, excessive force death cases involving police shootings, that kind of thing. And along the way, so I was running my own shop and had folks there. Along the way, I became of counsel at a catastrophic injury firm, and unbelievably, just an incredible firm with some of the best lawyers in the country, as far as I'm concerned, Feldman Shepard, which is based out of Philadelphia. And I'm still of counsel there actually now.
Yeah, I mean, I know Feldman Shepard. I've had cases against them. It's no joke having cases against them, and they're definitely in the upper echelon of what I would consider Philadelphia lawyers. So
every time I walk in, my imposter syndrome's kicking out. I'm like, what am I doing?
So while you're, you know, trying cases under your own shingle and of counsel for this other firm, did the anxiety lessen? What was happening to you personally as you were trying these cases?
Well, I don't know that the anxiety lessens so much as you come to recognize. So, right. So there was a point in time where, like, okay, well, you know, after I try 40 jury trials, I won't, you know, be anxious when I go in the courtroom, or I won't be, you know, feeling this way in the morning, or I won't be certain that my joke is going to bomb, you know, or, you know, jurors 7, you know, 9 and 11 are going to snore, you know, in the middle of my opening. You know, I started thinking, okay, well, I'll stop worrying about that soon. And of course, the reality is you're always going to worry about that, right? My joke always might bomb, you know, and, you know, the jurors might always look away when I try to get a, you know, facial recognition from them, right? And so I just got to a point where I started to move into it, right? And a lot of this has to do with, you know, ongoing dialogue that Jeff and I started at the public defender's office. We didn't talk much about it then. And that all changed over the years. You know, we began this journey of just like talking about how difficult and challenging the practice can really be. And I just started, you know, owning it, that of course you're going to feel that way. I mean, I got some guy, you know, sitting next to me who was in jail for years, who shouldn't have been, and, you know, and deserves to recover. And if I lose, he's not going to recover anything for those years he spent in jail. Well, you know, that can be a really lonely, sucky place to be, you know, but I have to, you know, and want to do it at the top of my game. which requires you moving into those feelings as opposed to away from them.
You can tell me if this is too personal, or you can just refuse to answer the question, whatever
I
you
could take
decide to
the
do.
fifth. Can I take the fifth?
You can take the 7th, the 8th, whatever you want to take,
Nobody
whatever
uses
number.
the seventh. The eighth, it might be actually excessive punishment. So maybe I'll have to take the eighth. Go ahead.
Okay. Now I have to remember what I was going to ask you. So what I was going to ask you is how did your anxiety manifest for you? I'm familiar with anxiety. I suffer with it myself, and I've had different variations over the years, and thanks to medication have been able to manage the more severe, panic attacks and disabling circumstances that can arise from it. So I know that there's quite a spectrum and different ways that it can come about. How did it manifest for you?
I mean, for me, I mean, it certainly manifested through, stress related, anxiety related triggers. I was not at my best outside the courtroom when I'm on trial. You know, you know, short tempered, distant, that kind of thing. But I think more for me, Talar, it was about not being at my best in my head all the time. Not being at my best in the courtroom. Fortunately, I didn't have, outward symptoms that in any way were kind of, at all sort of either debilitating or, kind of physically challenging. But, it's just the voices in your head about everything that's going to go wrong. You're catastrophizing, as opposed to flowing. Right. And you're never going to be at your best in the courtroom if you're walking toward the courtroom, catastrophizing about what might happen. Okay, sure, I might forget some great part of my closing, but, I've done it 57 times at this point and I haven't forgotten yet. Right. So I probably won't, but that doesn't mean that I won't think about it. Right. And then it just builds on itself. If you respond to the voices, it builds on itself. So it really just impacted and held me back from being, kind of the best that I could be. And it bleeds into, all the areas of your life. It just is, carrying those kind of feelings without confronting them, is going to eat away at your central nervous system, right? It's what it does.
Do you think that's more of a problem with men and versus women? Because I feel like women, maybe I'm stereotyping, get in touch with their feelings a little bit better than men. And especially male lawyers. I think women lawyers have a problem with it too, but we're supposed to be strong. We're supposed to not have anything bother us. We're supposed to, like you said at the top, always know the answers. But do you see that more of a problem with men, that they have a hard time accepting that fear, that anxiety, that stress?
Do they have a harder time talking about it? I mean, that's a hard question for me to answer. First of all, right, the field's been so male dominated for too long, right? That's one thing, right? And the prototypical, lawyer is the old white guy, right? So that's what you envision. But is it, and so that stereotype definitely piles on the male lawyers not talking about it, right? What we're trained and what are, sort of role models or figures that are out there are not people who walk around talking about their fear. That pervades the culture of the practice. And I think that maybe women can do it, more freely amongst one another, but I can't imagine it's any easier. And it's probably even more difficult when they're, in the minority or marginalized in the ways that they are in the law, because I'm, and I can only, sort of guess, but I would think it may even be more difficult then, in the firm environment or kind of within the culture of the practice.
Yeah, I think there's some validity to that. I think women have, again, stereotyping. There's exceptions to all this, and I could be completely off, but women tend to have closer female friends and they can vent to the female friends. I would never vent to a male boss. I've had plenty of male bosses. I would never go to them and tell them, hey, I don't want to do this trial because it makes me so nervous. Or how do I deal with the nerves? Like, that was never a conversation that we had. But I could go to my female friends, my female lawyers, and be like, oh my God, guys, I'm so petrified right now. How do I handle that? I wonder if men have that outlet. Like, I can't imagine my husband going to his male friends and being like, yeah, talking about his feelings, but
Right.
maybe he does and I don't know. So let me bring it back to something that I saw you write, which was, I think, really what prompted me to ask you to come on, because I was really blown away by the honesty of which you wrote. So bear with me. I'm gonna read this part for you. And this is what you wrote. Flipping the script. I spent many years attempting to fight off the anxiety associated with being a trial lawyer. I defined myself by victories and losses. I worried endlessly about how I was perceived within the profession. I internalized the conflict. It was always about me besting the opponents. I sought out increasingly difficult problems to solve. In turn, others brought me theirs to fix. I was a trial lawyer 24/7. My journey led me in search of peace and fulfillment within the law. What I found along the way was a far better advocate than I'd ever been previously. That version of myself litigated from the heart rather than the head. Yoga, the outdoors, daily conversations with Jeff, therapy, meditation, reading, journaling. As we say at Iron Advocate, killing it in the practice of law without it killing us. I was blown away by that because I thought, not many lawyers are that honest with what's going on in your thought and your inside. But to put it out to the public, can we talk about your journey to get there? Your willingness to be vulnerable in public. How did you get there?
I mean, what you read, thanks for the super kind words. I just think that's what most lawyers feel, right? I mean, that is how we define ourselves. It's how lawyers advertise against one another. It's the whole super lawyer thing and the rating systems and all of it. That's what the practice is about from a cultural perspective. And that's kind of what needs to change, I think. That's my 2 cents. I could have it completely and utterly wrong. I don't think so, but I could. In answer to your question, that was so. I'll be very honest with you, right? The launch of Iron Advocate, so a lot of this does have to do with, Jeff and I and our ongoing dialogue about this. And for those who haven't heard the podcast, Jeff runs a enormously successful and complex, high asset, high conflict, divorce practice out in Silicon Valley and in the Bay Area. It is seriously taxing. And we just, have had this ongoing dialogue. The launching of Iron Advocate, that was really hard for us. Tell
people what that is exactly.
So Iron Advocate is, it's a podcast. They can find it at ironadvocate.com. We launched it as a podcast. I do a lot of coaching and strategy work and programming with lawyers and law firms now around the themes of Iron Advocate, which is all the things that we're talking about on this podcast here, working with lawyers to change and enhance workplace culture, the firm culture, the mindset, performance anxiety. So we launched it, the podcast itself, in April of 2020. And it had been kind of a work in progress for a couple of years. And that was a lot of the transition to publicly talking about this. Is when we first started talking about it, we were like, are we really going to do this? Like, we're going to put this website up. This is what we're going to tell people. We're going to talk about this, on the air. And, and once it's out there, it's out there, right? We, really did have a lot of dialogue around that. So we were talking about it. I was living it and kind of believing it, but it's a whole other thing to, put it up on the internet. And if you go to our website, you'll see what we're talking about, right? It's different. It's out there, and what started happening though, of course, is when we started really putting life to it and asking other lawyers to come on and talk openly about their journeys, because our as you said, our tagline is killing it in the practice of law without killing us. But, a lot of what we do is try to find really successful lawyers who are killing it in the practice of law and who also are willing to talk about being on this journey and what it's like. And we have been so blessed with unbelievable guests that, what really happened is when we started approaching people and putting the pieces in place, we had lawyers that were willing to step up and say, well, of course, that's exactly how it is. And we've had some, seriously successful lawyers come on and talk about their therapists and, their coaches and, journaling and meditating and all that. So it kind of fed on itself, but certainly it was a difficult and uncomfortable transition from doing what I had done for many, many years and having the, kind of the, outward reputation that I could hold on to like a security blanket, right? And know I could walk in a room and I'd be that guy, and there's something really comforting about that. Now, when you get to the other side, it's way more comforting over here. But but it ain't so easy in the middle.
Were you, Bob, at the time that you decided to come out publicly, were you concerned at all about how others were going to react at your firm?
Um,
or even clients?
Not really. That was a much bigger issue. It's a much bigger issue for Jeff, certainly, who is, in the middle of really running, a super successful and, large family law firm out in San Francisco. I had already, entered a master's program in mental health counseling, Tulare, and was like on my way to getting a master's degree, which I just completed the coursework on, and had made an internal decision that my career was going to look different moving forward, and that I was, interested in working with and coaching, high functioning, high performing people. Yeah, a lot of lawyers, but not just lawyers, who are by all objective standards really successful, but there's more bandwidth there, and there's greater satisfaction there, and their limits truly are boundless once they kind of tap into this kind of a mindset. And I was kind of hell bent on doing that. By the time we put the podcast out publicly and launched the website, so I didn't worry too much about what the outside voices would be. I did, working through it for a long time, but by the time we launched, I had kind of gotten through that.
Curious to know if you have a daily self-care practice. Do you do anything on a routine basis to help you you mentally stay clear and disciplined and focused?
I'm usually on the yoga mat by 6 or 6:30 in the morning, for an hour long Zoom yoga class. That's pretty much 7 days a week. I'm a huge believer in the body mind practice. I really think moving your body every day, even if it's 15 minutes or 20 minutes. So, it can be a walk, it can be stretching. Huge believer in moving the body, to keep the mind kind of free. So that is, kind of a staple of my day. And then from there, it depends on the day. You heard me mention snowboarding at the top. I like to be outdoors if it's wintertime, doing that, hiking. I like to read, when I grab the time to do it. And, I eat well and all that, and spend a ton of time with my boys. I have two boys who are 17 and one that'll be 16 on Monday.
Wow. Amazing. Well, I got to think that even as focused on self-care that you are, that there are times in your day that frustration or stress come up. When you notice, one, are you aware of it? Like for me, that's my work right now, is to become aware of those feelings, the negative feelings, like just to become aware of it and not judge them. That's my work right now. I wonder, one, if you are aware of it, and two, if you've already passed the awareness phase, if you will, what you do when that happens.
That's life. That's the human experience. You're never going to be done that part. So I don't know when you go to the next part. So you just vacillate back and forth, but it's always a battle, right? I mean, so what you're really, I name it as just reactivity. It's being aware what your triggers are is for me, kind of what I hear you saying. I think it all starts with that. So, like my go-to mindset book is Search Inside Yourself, which is the book that was written by the folks that do the mindfulness programming at Google. And, the book is largely, the foundation of the book is just that, just being aware of what your triggers are. So, I mean, that's all day. I mean, stress, sure, stress, reactivity to, whatever frustrating thing happens or something that your, kids do or whatever, it's all around you. So that's a lot of my day. I mean, when I try to be better than I've been before each day at recognizing when I'm either hitting a wall or, I'm spinning, as I like to say it. I'll try to walk away more than I have before. That's always been a struggle for me, my lifelong struggle is, staying out of my head, right? Is my mind moves fast and it's hard for me to get out of my head. Right. So that's the lifelong battle, and, if you're, it's great you're doing it. If you think it's going to stop, kudos.
No, it's not that it's going to stop, but I think Tulare and I don't think I've ever said this to Tulare, but I consider her my spiritual sister because we have so many things in common. Eckhart Tolle being a big one. We're both big fans. She turned me on to him, and you know, we both share the same life coach, and I think we're drawn to the personal growth journey that I think awareness of what's going on in your head is the start to change what's going on in your head. And that's where I'm at now is to recognize when my ego is there and to put that aside and stay present. I mean, that's Eckhart Tolle in a nutshell. Stay present in the moment. So I was just curious, but I know his way isn't for everybody. So I was just kind of curious how you did.
Yeah, go ahead. I mean, Tara wanted to jump in. It's all awareness, right? And for me, it's about the reactivity, right? So it's, you know, I'm not a believer that you can or should will your mind through. You know, there are times when you have to just push yourself through something. I don't think that's a long-term recipe for success. For me, the longer-term recipe for success is, you know, what's a sustainable way to make the change, and what are my long-term goals, right? So, I mean, my biggest petri dish of reactivity is around my kids, right? I mean, as lawyers, we catastrophize, right? So, oh my God, I think I missed that deadline. The case is going to get dismissed. The client's going to find out. I'm going to lose my job. They're going to report me to disciplinary counsel, and I will be living in a dumpster, you know, like a year from now, right? And so, and I'll never see my, you know, family again, and I'll be a complete and utter, humiliated mess. That literally happens in less than 30 seconds, numerous times in a day to many, many lawyers, right? Including yours truly. So like, that's an area of reactivity, right? Why is that happening to me, right? Why am I catastrophizing? But the greatest area is with our kids, right? We can do the same thing with our kids and have them like literally in some hard life circumstance because they handed an assignment in late, you know, or because they, didn't respond to an email from their teacher, or because, you know, they screamed some, you know, insane profanity at the computer screen while playing a video game, right? They're going to become like horrible, bad people, you know? And so all that reactivity is around us all the time. So I try to just practice it, you know, in my everyday life. You know, my kids are the biggest petri dish. Like, okay, yes, I want to go in and like scream at the top of my lungs. Stop cursing at that, you know what, and screen right, you know what now. Okay. That's not ultimately going to have them embody what I'd like them to embody as adults. Right. I'd like them to get to where I am at this age, some decades before I got there. Right. And so the only way to do that is to embody it. Right. I can't force my way through. Okay, I'm going to be calm this time. Right. I just have to think like, this is not effective. Right. This is just not effective. Like, you know, it makes me feel good for like 30 seconds to scream, you know, like he just was at the screen, or to just pull the plug out of the wall. Right. Or say like, I'm just taking a freaking computer out of here. Right. That'll solve the problem, you know? So in the long run, like I just try to stay focused on what my objective is. My objective is to have, you know, whichever kid it is, embody a better way of dealing with shit than I have. Right. So you try to embody it. So that's a long-winded answer, but it all starts with awareness. Right. Why am I feeling like that? Because I'm catastrophizing what's going to happen, or it's just like making me nuts that they're behaving like this. And so if they don't stop behaving like this, that'll happen. And then this will happen. And then they'll be living in my basement until they're 35. Right. So, you know, I just try to like pay attention. And I do the same thing with the practice of law, you know, and that's a lot of what I talk to my clients about when I work with them in other areas now. So Talar, I'm sorry, I kept cutting you off. You were raising that finger and everything. So go ahead.
That's okay. I'm used to being ignored. You're fine. I was just going to say,
woe is Talar. Oh, it's so horrible. Go ahead, Talar.
the tiniest violin ever. Well, I was going to comment on what you were saying about 10 minutes ago in terms of your goal to try to stay out of your head. That's my goal too, is to stay out of your head, because mine already has a circus going on. I don't need your circus, you know, meeting my circus. But going back to what Patricia was saying earlier, and I don't even know if this is allowed, I may be violating podcast law as we speak. I am going to answer your question to Bob. I'm going to answer it.
Okay, go ahead.
But what I was going to say, and I'm sure Bob meant to say this too, is especially in the yoga practice, which for me, when I started practicing yoga, was the real connection between the mind and body. When you were talking about the awareness and how do you become aware, when I started practicing yoga, that's when I started becoming aware of how anxiety was feeling in my body. So I would feel it first before I could connect it to what are the thoughts I'm thinking. And even now, it might take a while for me to figure out, what is that thought? What is the thought that's causing me to have, the fluttering heart or the sweaty palms or the whatever? And I hate the question that our coach Olivia asks us, because she'll ask the question of, why are you feeling that way? And my answer is usually, I don't know. And what does she say, Trish?
Well, if you did know, what would you say?
I hate it when she asks
I know,
that.
me too.
I
Me
hate
too.
it. But it does usually deliver. It ends up helping. So anyway, there you go. That was
All
the
right.
answer you meant to provide, right, Bob?
That is exactly what I meant to say. And I would
That's
just
what I
add,
thought.
so the essence, Tor always knows what I'm thinking, Patricia. The you just follow us on LinkedIn, you'll see. I would just add that, the essence of yoga for me is that, and maybe you've heard me say this or not, or I've written it somewhere. It teaches you to become comfortable in uncomfortable positions. That's what yoga does, right? That's the practice of law. That's life. Welcome to it. It's not going to change. Most of it's uncomfortable. Sometimes it's just pure joy, but a lot of it's uncomfortable.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I had a consistent yoga practice for about 10 years in my late 20s into my 30s, where it was 6 days a week. And I was in the height of that stress of being a trial lawyer on the defense side. And it helped me out tremendously for that reason, because when you're in that yoga pose and your knee hurts or your hip hurts, or you're like, oh my God, I can barely breathe, you eventually, through that daily practice, accept that you're in pain. You're like, okay, that hurts. I'm going to just ignore it. Or, if you're at the end of your yoga pose when you do Shavasana and you're meditating and maybe your eye itches and you have to resist the urge to itch it and it goes away, like you learn to do that in your physical body. And then that translates into your everyday life where, yes, you're in that moment, you walk in, you're about to give oral argument and you're nervous as hell and it's painful. And you can, for me at least, during that time, I was able to channel that feeling of pain, physical, into mental pain and be like, all right, this is going to be painful. There is just no way around it. I didn't try to talk myself out of it. I just accepted it. And I always had this feeling of euphoria when I was done. I was like, yes, it's over. But I feel that I did that. And I miss my yoga practice for that reason. I had that Zen mind then without without much effort. But I just wanted to add that. What do you say to trial lawyers, litigation lawyers, and I even loop in some of our listeners, which are in the claims world, because they also deal with catastrophic accidents and they have to manage them. And I think there's a component to what trial lawyers deal with that claims professionals also deal with. But what would you say to those people that are in that, what I read, what you wrote that I read, that are in that, and they don't see a way out and they feel themselves getting buried by the mental aspects of the law?
I mean, I would say especially claims people, and not just, I mean, it is hard work, and you're dealing both on your own end and on the other end with people who are dealing with all the things we're describing and talking about. I mean, that managing claims is hard work, and you have some difficult people on the other side. Okay. Really difficult people. And on your side too, on both sides. Right. And it's high risk, it's high reward, it's high stakes, it's unforgiving. And often you're managed unfairly from both sides. The measuring stick for, how things went is askew, right? It's some abacus that, can't be applied to every single case, but that's how it gets looked at. So, how do you do that? I think that listen, there has to be a certain recognition. So particularly in that, kind of litigation, right? Or most of the law, there's a conflict, right? There's two people on opposite sides of some dispute or disputes. I mean, there are areas where, you're not doing that as much, but a lot, all litigation has that. So, I mean, there are certain like undeniable truths. There are things about it that suck, right? There's conflict. There's, people on the other side who don't always behave well and don't speak to you well. There's people on your own side who don't speak to you well and behave well. There's an enormous amount of stress. You're getting, measured by dollars. There's expectations. And then there's the performance part of it, the filing briefs or motions, that are public.
Or closing files. Yeah.
Right. The people are going to, respond to and publicly, call you out on all the things you did wrong. Now, then there's, of course, the ultimate performance part. If you're in the courtroom, there's the mediations, all of it. So, your inbox, your email inbox is so unpleasant many days, and so those are like undeniable truths. Now, underneath that is like, really complex problem solving, and human interactions and figuring people out and how to litigate a case and strategy. And those are the fulfilling parts of the law, right? I often tell lawyers, you're not chasing happiness. If you're chasing happiness, you're in the wrong line of work. Okay. You're chasing fulfillment, right? You're trying to find a place in the law where you can be fulfilled from what the work is really about. Be happy at your kid's Little League game, right? Or, be happy when you're out with your friends on Friday night, having a couple glasses of wine or whatever, right? Be happy in the yoga studio. You're not, if you get happiness, that's great, right? But fulfillment's what you're looking for, right? It's those aspects of the practice that kind of feed your soul and your brain and all that. And to answer your question, you have to accept those truths that make it unpleasant, right? The things that you recoil from, because a lot of them aren't really going to go away. It's the way that you frame them, just like I talked about with the trial work at the beginning. It's the way you frame the things that you're feeling. It's not that those feelings are going to change, right? I spoke at a firm recently, and they talked about having had other speakers in, and I'm sure they were wonderful, and no aspersions, but there were talks on strategies of like emptying your inbox, and the firm was concerned there was procrastination with responding to things and emails, and so they had speakers in to talk about all these strategies and making charts and graphs and eat the frog, which is like do the unpleasant things in the morning, and I said those are great strategies, use them if they work. My strategy is that my email box sucks, right? There's like people in there calling me names and saying bad things about me, and I got 3 emails with orders that I lost things in my case, and et cetera. That's not going to get more pleasant tomorrow, right? And so what gets you through it is saying, this is what allows me to go into a courtroom and, do something that I really get jazzed about, even if there is some anxiety with it, right? Or I get to solve these problems and figure this conflict out and, put these pieces together, right? You have to do those things to get to the things that are actually fulfilling, right? Emptying my email box is not fulfilling, right? Getting emails where people tell me like how wrong I am about things, that's not fulfilling, right? But there are lots of things about the law that are fulfilling, right? And so that's what I tell those people is you have to understand what's happening to you, right? You have to understand why you feel the way that you feel. You have to understand why you're feeling overwhelmed about whatever it is you're feeling overwhelmed about. Now, it may be that area of the practice isn't for you. Like the law is not for everybody. But one of the themes that I hear over and over is people flee from the practice, or they're just, forever miserable in it because they don't actually understand what's happening to them. Right? They'll flee the practice instead of making a mindful decision that the practice might not be for them. Right? If you leave the practice and you don't understand what was happening to you or why you left, that's not the best process to get there. Right? It's not the right process to get there. So, I hope that answers your question. I think that people have to talk about it, right? They got to unpack why it feels like that to be on the claim side, right? And then if underneath all of that is like, none of this is fulfilling to me, well, those are different decisions to make as to whether it is or isn't the job for you. But if you haven't done that unpacking to figure out whether it is, listen, I love trying cases, right? That doesn't mean that there aren't, that there's not, 48.7% that's never going to be pleasant, right? But, standing up and nailing a closing, there's nothing better than that, right? But it's just painful to get there sometimes, right? But when it starts happening, right? When it's like, right? Or having a jury foreperson stand up and, and return some awesome verdict for you, I don't want to give that up. I just want to understand what's happening to me on the way. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but.
No, that's what I was going to ask you. If you could give some examples of what you find fulfilling in the practice of law.
I mean, a great cross-examination, like filleting somebody, like really bringing a case down. I mean, it doesn't, it's really hard to reenact that in any other aspect of your life, right? That's why like you want to get to a place where you understand all of it, right? Because then it's that much more fulfilling, right? Because you understand like the whole anxiety of, oh, like what if this, or, I got this killer question, but it doesn't go right. You don't pivot as well if you're in your own head about what if, right? But there is nothing, I mean, a great cross-examination, somewhere I told the story of, some stories from, a case I tried not too long ago where I walked up and got in the witness stand. And I, put my hand on the Bible. I swore myself in. I pulled the microphone close to me. Sure, I had to work through the anxiety of, oh, they're going to object. And then what if the judge screams at me? And what if it all goes sideways, right? But what if it freaking works, right? And I swear myself in and I point down at the defendant and I say, and he's going to lie and lie and lie, right? And before the other side knows, like, okay, they can object, but now like the objection helps you, and on and on. So, I mean, there's, tons of things about trying cases that are awesome, opening, closing. It's like I said, it's that it's not when it's happening that the anxiety and stuff is a killer. That's not when it is. It's not when you're doing it. Not if you really like to do it. It's not when you're doing it. It's getting there. Right. So, I'm sure, whatever your sport is, whether it was Kirk Gibson and, I'm sure in the on deck circle, when he hit that home run in '88, right, and had to limp around the bases, I'm sure he was feeling some anxiety in the on deck circle. But when he stepped in the batter's box, he was okay. Right. Just like Jordan and Kobe and LeBron and all of them feel the anxiety. Right. But when they step on the floor, they've already dealt with it, so.
And I think that's so important because like that's been my experience too. It's the anxiety and the prep and then and the overthinking and that. But once you do step into it, you're so in the moment that your thoughts aren't, at least for me, my thoughts aren't doing anything. But in that, I am crystal clear. But it is hard to get there. But I do know people, there's a lot of people in our profession that don't like to try cases. And they can find fulfillment, like you can find fulfillment in writing. If you write a masterful brief or a mediation statement, something that wows somebody else, that can be fulfillment. It could be in negotiating, like maybe you're crush it. And when you get into a mediation and you have an innate skill of sensing what somebody else is thinking or doing, like that could be a sense of fulfillment. Because I think so many lawyers in the litigation side feel like they have to love trial work. And you really don't. You can have so many other different things that you can love. But like you said, taking the time to really do the work to figure out what that is before you move on, I think is so key. So I love that point.
I mean, right. It's all, I mean, writing is critical. Like it's just critical, and you can find great joy. And it's probably the most important tool for, quite frankly, like if I could, if you could impart in every law school graduate one skill they did best, it would be writing. There's no question about that. Full stop. Right. But yeah, you just have to understand, have to air quotes, you should. And I wish they talked more about it in law school, understanding the practice, the business of the practice, the emotions that come with it, so that you can unpack that and get to the stuff that, is really fulfilling. That's exactly right. It's because it is a tough place and there'll be unhappy lawyers, but the numbers are where they are because of this dialogue we're having, right? Is that people just become frozen and they don't want to figure out what's happening to them. It's like Jeff and I were arguing the other day. Okay, 48.7% of the law sucks, right? Like what's the percentage of of the law that sucks, right? We were having this theoretical conversation about it, but a lot of the things like we talked about. So I don't know. What do you?
And I think as you advance in your career, if you stick with it, and this is just my experience, that you get into positions where you can pick more of what you enjoy doing and you can delegate what you don't to other people, and it becomes more enjoyable. If you stick it out longer, it becomes more enjoyable because you're able really to recognize and handle the things that you find that are uniquely special to you and that you're really good at, and you can own up to what you're not great at or what your weaknesses are, and you can team up with somebody, you can hire somebody that your weakness is their strength. So I think that if you can stick it out long enough, there is a light at the end of that tunnel.
What it reminds me of is when I was in private practice and I'd first gone back to Fisher and Phillips, where I was working, where I started out as a file clerk and I later became a partner. But when I'd first gone back, I remember the managing partner, he would give me these great opportunities. He'd give me cases that were great opportunities. That was code for here's the suck. I'm going to enjoy more of what I like to do by delegating the suck, AKA opportunities. So that's what you get when you're, further along in your career. But, going back to something you were saying earlier in terms of things that you can find fulfilling, I was in private practice for more than 10 years, civil litigation, employment defense. I never went to trial as a lawyer. I'd gone to trial as a paralegal, but most of those cases just didn't go to trial. They ended up settling, did a lot of, insurance work. And I mean, not that that makes a difference in how vigorously you're going to defend the case, but most of the cases it ended up resolving. But so my great fulfillment that I got really was knowing that I was able to help a client. When a client called me and I could be there and help them walk through a difficult situation, I had the satisfaction of knowing that, I mattered today and I made a difference. So for me, that was my fulfillment. Although I would have loved this, I always wanted a chance to be able to say in court, you can't handle the truth. Did you ever get to do that, Bob? Did you get to say that?
My own versions of it.
Yeah.
You can't be cliche in the courtroom. So you got to be authentic. Can't be cliche in the courtroom.
Yeah, but that's one of those classic ones. The other thing that I never got to do that I always wanted to do is I wanted to be able to tell the judge, I see dead people.
You have to mark and identify the dead people first, and then you can let the judge or the witness see them. So I don't know if you'd be able to find the dead people to actually put the exhibit sticker on them, but
I mean, if they were mummified,
Talar could find them.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. But wouldn't that be fun? How fun would that be to get to say that?
Listen, the courtroom is fun. It is. Yeah. It's just you got to get through some of the. Now, to Patricia's point, not for everybody, and that's okay. Right. That's okay too. There's, I know a lawyer spends his days, in a dark room with 4 screens open writing and loves it. Right. I like to write, but I don't want to sit in a room for, 15 hours a day with 4 screens writing. He does, And
I think that's so important. Like, just be honest with yourself. Be honest with yourself. Don't think about what you should like or should enjoy, but to think about what you actually enjoy. Because I think that for the first 15 years of my career, I shoulded myself left and right. I should do that. I should do this because that's what lawyers do. And until I got real with myself, that's when my career kind of went in a really great direction. So,
and it's also the things that we talked about that are, somewhere between difficult, uncomfortable, and painful, and identify those ones that may not change and be okay with them or not okay with them. Right. Just understand what they are, and they'll always, I'll always be, have the tendency to think, okay, I have to close tomorrow. There's this problem I have to solve. Let me sit in front of my legal pad, right? And, just write the same thing over and over again, for 3 hours, right? Even though I've lived with the case for, years, right? I always have that tendency, but now I'm able to get myself to a place where I go for a run or, I do yoga or something that gets me out of my head. But I have to recognize the tendencies, right? I'm always going to have that, probably going to have that tendency. That's insecurity, fear. I'll just figure this out, let me stay in my head, so there's all different layers of it. And, it's a lifelong journey. It's like the more honest you want to be with yourself, the more you'll get fulfillment. I always use that word fulfillment. I don't know that the chase is for happiness in that area, in this kind of a job. I don't know that the chase is for happiness.
Well, I have to say, I absolutely love what you're doing. I think it's such a needed space that it's really good work. I think you're just generally trying to help people, and I think that's amazing. Before I let you go, 2 questions. What are you reading these days?
And I always read Search Inside Yourself. I usually read it for 10 minutes a day or so. It's always stuffed in my bag someplace.
I have those books too, where I revisit. So,
Yeah.
and then where can people find you if they want to see your content and learn more about you?
They can find me on LinkedIn, where I kind of journal publicly. That's how I look at LinkedIn. They can find me at ironadvocate.com, which is the website. The podcast is hosted there. It's also, on Apple and Spotify and Pandora and all those cool places. They can email me. They're welcome to email me at bob@ironadvocate.com. And I'll reply, hopefully as expeditiously as I can, and listen to the podcast. And that's it. So I'm available and having fun, just kind of having this conversation and trying to work with folks and provide some value.
Well, I think it's amazing. Thank you so much for coming in. And I just want to say to everybody, thank you for listening. If you like what we're doing, we would super appreciate giving us that 5-star review and writing up a review for us. It helps us out in the ratings and helps us get on the Apple charts, which I'm realizing is super important. So make sure you do that for us if you're inclined, and make sure you come back for another episode of the Defense Never Rests. We will see you then.